The fog rolled through London like a living thing, soft and slow, curling around the gas lamps that lined the narrow cobbled streets. The year was 1885, a time when the city's wealth and filth lived side by side. From the glittering halls of Westminster to the rotting docks of Limehouse, secrets moved faster than carriages, traded in whispers, bought in silence on this night. Beneath the soot-streaked rooftops, the rain came without sound. It soaked through the broken chimneys, dripped through the cracks of forgotten homes, and gathered in the narrow alleys where the unwanted of the empire slept. The air smelled of burnt coal and ink, the scent of progress and ruin together. The fire had broken out hours earlier at the edge of Whitechapel, not uncommon in those parts. But this blaze had been deliberate. A small warehouse turned to ash, its remains guarded by soldiers who did not belong to the city's police. Their uniforms bore no mark of the crown, and yet their authority silenced even the loudest onlookers. By dawn, the smoke had thinned, leaving only a blackened skeleton of stone and steel. Inside, buried beneath layers of ash, a single object remained untouched, a brass insignia in the shape of a lion's head, crowned and scarred by fire. It belonged to no known regiment, yet every man who saw it turned pale, as if they had glimpsed something meant never to resurface. Far from the wreckage, across the river in a quiet quarter near Kensington, the city stirred awake. Behind the frosted windows of an upper-class home, a study light burned steadily. The man within, known to most only as Inspector Halric Vane, sat before a cluttered desk, his eyes scanning a report smudged with soot and blood. The handwriting was neat, controlled, the kind only used by men trained to conceal meaning. The report spoke of the fire, but what caught his eye wasn't the destruction. It was the final line, half-burned, but legible enough to send a chill crawling up his spine. The ashes will rise beneath the crown. He had seen this phrase before, carved into the hilt of a blade 15 years ago, the day his partner was killed in a case buried by royal decree. Outside, church bells tolled 6 times, and London's heart began to beat again. Carriages rumbled. Paper boys shouted headlines soaked in lies. Somewhere beyond the mist, a secret had begun to wake, one that would drag Halric Vane into a conspiracy stretching from the gutters of London to the throne itself. And as the city inhaled the last of the night's smoke, the truth began its slow, merciless approach, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment it would set the empire aflame again. By the time the morning sun bled over the rooftops, London had already swallowed its newest tragedy. The newspapers printed what they were told: an accident, a gas explosion, nothing more. But beneath that thin veneer of order, the city buzzed with the quiet pulse of unease. Word had spread of strange soldiers at the fire scene, of symbols melted into stone, of whispers that the crown itself was hiding something. Inspector Halric Vane left his home before the city's noise grew unbearable. His boots struck the cobblestones with the rhythm of thought, steady, relentless, searching. The chill in the air carried more than rain. It carried questions that the city would not ask aloud. His path wound through Westminster's narrow arteries. Past the faces that watched but pretended not to see, he stopped only once, beneath the great clock tower that marked the beating heart of the empire. Big Ben loomed above like a sentinel of brass and shadow, its gears turning with a precision that mocked the chaos below. Time here did not pass. It commanded. The tower was under repair, scaffolding wrapping its stone frame like the ribs of some enormous beast. Halric's eyes found what others might not notice: a dark figure among the scaffolds, high above, standing motionless as though part of the structure itself. The man did not belong. Even from this distance, there was an unmistakable stillness about him, not the kind born of fear, but of discipline. Moments later, the figure vanished. A faint glint fell from above, catching the morning light before disappearing into the fog. When Halric reached the base of the scaffolding, He found it, a small brass gear engraved with the same lion's head insignia he'd seen at the fire at IT wasn't coincidence. The inspector pocketed the gear and looked up again, his breath steadying against the rising wind. The tower had always been a monument to control, the Empire's precision, its heartbeat, its authority over time itself. But as the great bell struck 8, something in the tone felt wrong. The resonance trembled, lingering longer than it should have. As if the metal had been tampered with, the city below continued its rhythm, unaware that the sound that marked each passing hour had just changed, ever so slightly. That same hour, a cleaner found a body within the clock tower's maintenance level. The man's throat was burned black, his skin dusted with soot, and in his gloved hand, clenched tightly even in death, he held a folded scrap of paper that IT was passed quickly to the authorities. But before the file reached Halric's desk, it had already been marked classified by royal order. He received only a summary: cause of death, undetermined, access to the body, denied. But Halric Vane had learned long ago that denial was just another form of confirmation. The gear in his pocket felt heavier with each passing minute. Somewhere high above, within the clock's iron veins, someone had sent him a message, and it had already begun to tick. The fire, the insignia, the phrase in the report, all fragments of a machine far larger than he had imagined. As the fog thickened over the Thames, Halric turned away from the tower. Somewhere in the east, smoke was rising again, thin and deliberate, the same kind that started in Whitechapel. And deep beneath the city's breath, the echo of the bell carried across the water, marking not just time, but the beginning of something vast, orchestrated, and irreversible. London did not sleep that night. It only pretended to. Beneath the thin veil of fog, the city exhaled secrets through every alley, every lamplight, every footstep that lingered too long. Inspector Halric Vane knew this rhythm well. It was the heartbeat of the Empire's hidden machinery. And tonight, that machinery had begun to grind against itself. By morning, the brass gear he'd found in the clock tower had already vanished from his evidence drawer. No signs of entry, no fingerprints, just a faint residue of oil, the same mechanical scent that clung to the air inside the tower. Whoever had taken it knew exactly what they were doing. But Halric had one advantage the thief didn't expect. He'd made a copy. A small wax imprint, crude but detailed enough to capture the insignia's fine curves. A lion's head surrounded by 12 teeth, each tooth engraved with a number. When he'd examined it under his magnifier, he'd realized those numbers weren't random. They were coordinates. The map led him east, far from the polished marble of Westminster, through the narrow arteries of the Docklands where fog and corruption shared the same breath. There, beneath a derelict textile factory, he found a doorway carved into the old foundation, sealed behind rusted metal, but not forgotten. Someone had tried to erase it, but the outline remained, faint under the grime. He pried it open with quiet effort. The hinges groaned like an old beast disturbed from sleep. Inside, the air was stale, carrying the scent of oil, ink, and something metallic. Not blood, not quite, but close. Lantern light revealed a vast underground chamber, an architectural skeleton of pipes and gears stretching into darkness. On the walls, symbols identical to the clock tower engravings shimmered faintly in the flickering glow. But what struck him most was the machinery itself. Massive, interconnected pistons and rotating drums. A mechanism without any clear purpose. It wasn't a factory. It was a system. And at the center of it all stood a single chair. A man sat there, lifeless, strapped with copper coils and a brass circlet fastened to his skull. His eyes were open but empty, drained of thought, of memory, of identity. Around him, paper sheets hung from clips, filled with rows of calculations and cryptic diagrams of human anatomy, fused with mechanical design. Halric's heart sank, not from fear, but from understanding. Someone was trying to engineer the human mind, to turn it into a part of a machine. The walls around him whispered of intelligence, of design far beyond criminal intent. This wasn't the work of radicals or revolutionaries. This was organized, funded, protected. He followed a trail of thin copper wires that disappeared into a dark corridor. They led him to a steel door sealed with an imperial crest. The same lion insignia again, only this time, beneath it, faint lettering read, Bureau of Temporal Affairs. The phrase struck him like cold iron. The Bureau was myth, a ghost organization whispered about by military officers and dismissed by Parliament as rumor. They were said to manipulate information, control timelines of political events, rewrite moments in history to preserve the empire's order. But here it was, breathing in the dark. The sudden vibration ran through the floor. The machinery around him began to hum, slow and steady. The gears turned. The chair trembled. And on one of the hanging papers, fresh ink began to spread across the page, as if an invisible hand was writing. Halric leaned close. The words formed themselves, precise, deliberate, chilling. "You're late, Inspector." Every lantern in the chamber flickered out. The hum rose into a metallic roar. And from the shadows beyond the door, a faint pulse of golden light bled through the seams. Rhythmic, intelligent, alive. As the sound swallowed him, Halric realized what this place truly was. Not a bureau of men, but of machines that remembered. Machines that obeyed. Machines that waited. And somewhere within their whirring hearts, his name had already been entered into their system. The hum of the underground chamber sank into a deep, mechanical heartbeat, slow, steady, deliberate. Each vibration seemed to echo through the metal beneath Halric's boots, pulsing like the blood of something ancient and alive. He stood in complete darkness now, save for the faint golden fissures of light leaking from the sealed steel door ahead. Behind him, the air felt heavy, as though the room itself was waiting for him to act. Halric took a breath and stepped forward. The temperature dropped with every movement. His lantern had long extinguished, yet the strange glow from the door illuminated the outlines of gears and conduits snaking along the walls, veins of copper and iron carrying something that was not electricity. He pressed his palm against the door. It was warm, impossibly warm for metal buried deep beneath the city. Then, without resistance, the door opened inward, as if responding to his touch. What lay beyond defied logic. That a vast circular hall stretched before him, its domed ceiling lined with intricate glass panels that shimmered with faint energy. In the center stood a colossal structure, a sphere of rotating metal rings, each one engraved with symbols and numbers that shifted and reformed in perfect synchronization. The memory engine.it floated inches above the ground, humming softly, the air around it vibrating like a struck chord. Thin beams of light shot from its core, projecting streams of images into the air, memories, moments frozen in time, flickering like broken reels of film. He saw glimpses of faces, places, wars, inventions, even newspaper headlines that had never been printed. Some were from the past, others from futures that hadn't happened. As he moved closer, a ripple ran across the engine's surface. The projections changed, focusing on one specific image, his own face. Halric watched as the holographic version of himself moved through scenes he had never lived. A battlefield, a courtroom, a burning city. In one image, he stood in uniform beside an unfamiliar monarch. In another, he lay lifeless beneath the ruins of London. The engine was showing him possibilities, alternate versions of his life that he tried to look away, but the machine responded, adjusting the projections, now displaying classified documents, stamped with the emblem of the Bureau of Temporal Affairs. There were lists of names, operations, and code names. Project Hourglass, Chrono Directive, Operation Lazarus. Then one line caught his attention, the handwriting unmistakable, bold, sharp, primary subject, Inspector Halric Vane. Every trace of warmth left his body. The air grew electric. He wasn't an intruder here. He was part of it, but he scanned further. Below his name was a designation, Anchor, Temporal Stabilization Protocol. And beside it, cycle number 17. Status, unstable. His knees weakened. 17 cycles. 17 repetitions of his life, erased and rewritten, over and over, each time manipulated by the Bureau. He wasn't chasing a conspiracy. He was the experiment. Suddenly, a low, resonant voice echoed through the hall. Not a man's voice, not entirely. It carried the mechanical modulation of something half-human, half-machine. Cycle 18 initiated. Subject awakening confirmed. Halric turned toward the source. A figure emerged from the shifting light, tall, dressed in the Bureau's black uniform, face hidden beneath a silver mask carved with the same lion insignia. That IT spoke again, calm, clinical. You've reached this point before, Inspector. Curiosity always leads you here, but you never remember. Halric stepped back, his pulse hammering in his throat. The figure raised a small, brass device, a control unit, no larger than a compass, with symbols rotating around its edge. This time, the voice continued, "We make it permanent." The controls dial began to spin. The room trembled. The memory engine blazed with golden light, flooding every surface, every thought. Halric shielded his eyes as the world around him dissolved into a whirl of timelines. His memories shredding, rearranging, reforming. He saw flashes of every version of himself: soldier, traitor, scientist, corpse. Each one ending the same. Inside this room, before this machine, but in the chaos, something shifted. He remembered the wax imprint, the coordinates, the fact that he'd found this place before and made preparations. Inside his coat pocket, his fingers brushed the hidden shard of the brass gear he'd kept from the clock tower. The real one, not the copy. He thrust it toward the engine's core. The sphere reacted violently. The light fractured. The sound turned from hum to scream. The masked figure stumbled back, shouting commands to unseen systems. And then, silence. The light collapsed inward, folding space into itself, and with one final pulse, the entire chamber went dark. When Halric opened his eyes, he was standing in his office, daylight streaming through the windows, the city alive outside. His pocket was empty. The gear was gone. His clock ticked steadily on the wall, but on his desk, freshly printed and impossible, lay a note written in his own handwriting. "You broke the cycle, but they're still watching." Outside, the clock tower bells struck noon, and somewhere beneath the city, in the buried halls of the Bureau, the memory engine began to hum again, faintly, patiently, waiting for the next cycle to begin. Rain returned to London with a quiet persistence, veiling the streets in a cold shimmer. The city, unaware of its fractures, pulsed with routine, cabs rolling through puddles, merchants shouting across markets, the hum of a metropolis clinging to its illusions. But for Halric Vane, the air itself had changed. He sat motionless in his office, eyes fixed on the note he'd found after waking from the impossible. "You broke the cycle, but they're still watching." Each word felt carved rather than written, pressed deep into the fibers of the paper like a warning that refused to fade. For hours he studied his surroundings, testing the limits of what felt real. The clock ticked normally, yet sometimes its rhythm faltered, a missed beat, a subtle delay. His coffee cooled too quickly, as if time around him bent and stretched in silent waves. Even his reflection in the office mirror blinked a fraction too late. At by evening, the city lights began to shimmer through the fog. He left his office and took to the streets, moving with purpose but not direction. Instinct guided him, the same inner compass that had led him beneath the tower before. Every street corner seemed to whisper his name. Every stranger's gaze lingered just a second too long. He turned down an alley near Fleet Street. The rain had stopped, leaving the cobblestones slick and mirror-like. There, painted in faint luminescent ink, was the lion insignia, the mark of the Bureau. Beneath it, words had been stenciled in fine script. Protocol active. Observation in effect. He knelt, running his fingers across the writing. It pulsed faintly under his touch, alive. Then, from the shadowed entrance of the alley, a camera lens clicked. Halric turned sharply, catching sight of a figure retreating behind a wall. Not military, civilian clothes, but too precise, too measured. He followed. The pursuit twisted through narrow paths, through market backstreets and forgotten passages, until the man slipped into a derelict telegraph building marked condemned. Inside, dust danced through thin slats of light. The air smelled of rust and ozone. Wires still hung from the ceilings like dead veins, leading to a central console, one that was still powered. Halric moved closer, brushing dust off a brass nameplate. The Observer Network, Division 04. The monitor flickered to life on its own. Lines of code scrolled rapidly, interspersed with fragmented images, moments of his own life caught from impossible angles. His office, his walks through the park, his visit to the clock tower. Every movement recorded. A new line appeared at the bottom of the screen. Cycle 18, observation confirmed. Subject showing anomaly in recall retention. Then, a second message blinked in red. Termination override denied. Directive suspended. Awaiting manual review. Halric felt a pressure build in his chest. Someone inside the Bureau was protecting him, holding off his erasure. But why? He moved behind the console and found a hatch built into the wall. Inside lay reels of magnetic film and dozens of small crystal vials, each one labeled with a name and date. He lifted one, Vane, Halric/Cycle 17. Inside, swirling light pulsed faintly, alive with memory. He understood now. The Bureau didn't destroy people. It stored them, recycling their consciousness across timelines, rewriting memories like reels of film. And the Observer Network was their surveillance system, watching every iteration, ensuring compliance. Suddenly, the console sparked. A voice, female, clear but synthetic, filled the room. Inspector Vane, you are not authorized for retrieval access. The monitors glitched, images blurring. Static resolved into the faint outline of a woman's face. Not human, not entirely machine. Her eyes glowed with the same soft gold as the memory engine. You were meant to forget, she said. But you've remembered too much. Halric didn't move. The woman's projection wavered as though struggling against itself. They are rewriting the city, Inspector. Every hour, every life, recalculated to ensure stability. But stability comes at a cost. The static thickened. Someone altered your file, she continued. Someone wants you to see beyond the cycle. If you wish to know who, follow the signal to the old observatory. Then the screen went black. Outside, lightning cracked across the skyline. From his vantage point, Halric could see the observatory perched high on the hill beyond the river. A silhouette against the storm, waiting like a silent eye. He pocketed the vial marked with his name. Somewhere deep in his mind, a buried memory stirred, of a woman's voice whispering his name through the noise of collapsing timelines, promising that not all who watch are enemies. And as the rain began again, Halric Vane set off toward the observatory, unaware that from the rooftop opposite, a dozen lenses turned in unison to follow him. The Bureau was watching. But so was something else. The storm arrived with a fury that made London seem alive. Rain lashing the rooftops, wind thrashing against lampposts, thunder rolling across the skyline like the growl of some unseen god. From the foot of the Thames embankment, the Royal Observatory loomed above the city, half shrouded in mist, its ancient dome flickering with faint blue light. Halric Vane trudged uphill through the storm, coat soaked and eyes fixed on the glow that pulsed like a heartbeat within the old structure. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though gravity itself resisted him. His hand tightened around the vial in his pocket. Cycle 17. Vane, Halric. It pulsed faintly with warmth, synchronized with his own heartbeat. By the time he reached the observatory gates, the storm had softened into a dense drizzle. The building stood silent, its great clock frozen at midnight. Broken glass littered the path, reflecting flashes of lightning. The main doors, though locked, gave way with a single shove, as if time had weakened their will to resist. Inside, the silence was thick. The halls smelled of dust, iron, and ozone. Faded constellations lined the ceiling, their stars dimmed by centuries of neglect. Yet the faint hum of machinery echoed from the main chamber, a low, constant vibration that didn't belong to this era. Halric descended the narrow stairwell into the observatory's core. What he found was no mere relic of astronomy. It was an intersection of science and secrecy. The ancient telescopic mount had been replaced with a colossal device of brass and crystal, its components revolving in complex mechanical patterns. Every rotation released a pulse of light, rippling outward like sound waves through still water. Instruments around it blinked in rhythmic intervals, marking frequencies, patterns, and sequences. He recognized none of the machinery, yet all of it felt familiar, as though his mind remembered what his memory did not. The console on the side displayed a string of coordinates, not locations, but timestamps. Each one corresponded to a cycle. Then, the machine changed. The pulse slowed. The frequency aligned. And a faint projection materialized in the air, not of a person this time, but a map. London, divided into grids, glowing veins of light threading through its streets. Each vein pulsed in time with the clock tower bell. The observatory was not just a vantage point. It was a transmitter. It was broadcasting time itself. Halric realized the truth. The Bureau had turned London into a mechanism, a living clock that reset its own history. The memory engine beneath the city collected consciousness, while the observatory regulated when and how the reset began. But then, another signal emerged, hidden beneath the main frequency, faint, encrypted, like a whisper buried in static. Halric tuned the dial. The sound grew sharper until a voice broke through the noise. Halric, if you hear this, it means you survived the memory collapse. He froze. The voice was familiar, calm, deliberate. It was his own. You've been repeating this cycle for too long. Each time, they rewrite you, change your motives, your memories, your loyalties. But I left this message for you, for me, before the last collapse. There's one constant that the Bureau cannot erase, the truth encoded within the signal itself. The projection flickered again, now revealing lines of data interwoven with star charts. Beneath them, one line repeated in red, singularity point, 0 degrees longitude, 0 degrees latitude. Halric whispered the words aloud. Greenwich Meridian. The prime meridian, the line where time begins. The center of every map, every calculation, every cycle. The Bureau had chosen this site not for history, but for control. Whoever commanded the meridian controlled the flow of time. Lightning flashed outside. The machine roared to life, spinning faster, lights surging through its rings. The ground shook. The storm above shifted, clouds spiraling in unnatural patterns. Halric stepped back, shielding his eyes as beams of light shot skyward. Splitting the storm open like glass, he turned toward the control panel, searching for a way to stop the overload. His fingers found a manual release lever, half buried beneath decades of dust. He pulled it, the lights dimmed, but not before one final pulse erupted, flooding the chamber in golden light. When it cleared, Halric was no longer alone. Standing at the far end of the platform was a figure in a black bureau coat, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. The man's face caught the light. Older, scarred, but unmistakable. Halric was staring at himself. The older version of him raised a gloved hand, voice calm but resolute. You weren't supposed to come here this early. The cycle isn't ready to fracture. The younger Halric stepped forward, confusion sharpening into dread. What are you? His older self smiled faintly. The last iteration that remembered. Before Halric could react, the older version pressed a brass key into his hand, the same insignia etched into its handle. When the observatory resets, follow the line back to where time began. Only there will you find the architect. The storm outside intensified. The machine howled. The lights surged one final time before the entire structure collapsed inward, imploding into darkness. When Halric opened his eyes again, he was lying in the rubble. The observatory was gone, reduced to ash and fragments. But the key in his hand glowed faintly, still warm that he looked toward the horizon. The first light of dawn cut through the clouds, landing directly on the Greenwich line. The prime meridian, glimmering faintly with residual energy. Somewhere ahead lay the truth, the source of the Bureau's control, the architect who had built the endless cycle. Halric Vane stood, rain dripping from his coat, and began his walk along the line where time itself began to bend. The morning light broke over the ruins of Greenwich like a hesitant awakening, golden threads weaving through smoke and mist, brushing across what was left of the observatory. The rain had stopped, but the air still trembled with static, the scent of ozone heavy as breath. Halric Vane stood at the edge of the wreckage, the brass key glinting faintly in his palm. Ahead, the prime meridian was no longer a mere steel line embedded in stone. It pulsed, faint, rhythmic, alive. Each pulse sent a shimmer across the ground, the air bending in its wake as if time itself were exhaling. Halric took a step forward. The moment his boot crossed the line, the world shifted, the wind ceased. The sounds of London faded into silence. The smoke around him froze mid-swirl, droplets suspended like shards of glass. Even his heartbeat slowed, syncing with the rhythm of the glowing line beneath his feet. Then the ground fell away that he was weightless, adrift in a cascade of colors that stretched endlessly in every direction. Not space, not light, something in between. He recognized it instinctively. Temporal flow, the current between past and possible. The prime meridian wasn't just geography. It was the hinge where timelines met. Voices murmured in the current, echoes of every life he had lived. Halric, don't trust them. The signal isn't what you think. You built this. You built me. His chest tightened. Built? He whispered. The current parted before him, revealing a structure suspended in the void, vast, circular, metallic. A clockwork citadel, its gears the size of cities, rotating through transparent layers of light. At its center stood a single tower of crystal, its top vanishing into infinity, the citadel of ours, headquarters of the Bureau in its purest form. Not a building in time, but time made into architecture. As Halric approached, the brass key in his hand began to hum. Its glow intensified, and before him, a doorway unfolded from thin air, edges drawn in gold, frame vibrating like a held breath that he stepped through. The interior was quiet, too quiet. Endless corridors of mirrored glass stretched in every direction, reflecting versions of himself walking in parallel lines, each making slightly different movements. Some older, some younger, some wearing Bureau insignias, others dressed like fugitives that he realized the mirrors weren't reflections. They were timelines. One of them caught his attention, a version of himself standing beside a woman in a lab, both of them smiling at a glowing core suspended in liquid crystal. The plaque beneath read, Project Chronos, initiated by Dr. Halric Vane and director Halric Vane. His breath caught. Halric. The name unlocked a cascade of memories, her voice echoing in dim halls, her hand guiding his across equations, her whisper before the collapse. If they ever erase me, find the architect. He pressed his palm to the glass. The image shimmered, then dissolved into words that access granted. Singularity chamber. The mirrors rotated, aligning into a spiral corridor leading downward. He followed. The air grew colder, thinner. Time itself seemed to bend, seconds stretching, minutes collapsing. By the time he reached the bottom, he no longer felt bound to linear movement. The center of the chamber, suspended in a pool of liquid light, was a figure. She turned slowly, her features illuminated by the pulse of the Chronos core. Her eyes reflected infinite timelines, calm, knowing, almost sorrowful. Elara, Halric breathed. She smiled faintly. You finally made it back. He stepped closer, voice trembling. How? You died during the collapse. I saw. What you saw, she interrupted gently, was the Bureau's memory of me. They erased me from your cycle to keep you loyal. But every erasure leaves residue. Every loop leaves a trace. I followed those traces here. Halric's mind spun. You built the Chronos engine with me? She nodded. Together. It was meant to preserve history, not rewrite it. But the Bureau turned it into a cage. Each reset erases rebellion, corrects deviation, maintains control. You've lived 17 lives under their machine. He clenched his fists. Then how do we end it? Elara looked toward the core, a sphere of pure energy suspended by threads of light, ticking softly like a heart. The engine runs on synchronization. Every mind connected to it sustains the cycle. If we break that synchronization, the cycle collapses. Halric finished. Yes, she said softly, but it will erase everything tied to it, including us. The silence that followed was heavy. He looked down at the brass key. It pulsed with a heartbeat, his own. You left this for me. I did, she said. It's the master key, the fragment of your original self, before they rewrote your mind. It can unlock the core's true sequence. He hesitated. If I use it, will we remember? Will the world? Alara's eyes dimmed. No, but it will be free. The core's light began to flicker. The Bureau had detected the breach. Sirens echoed faintly in the chamber, mechanical footsteps reverberating above. Elara stepped closer. They're coming. You don't have time to doubt. Halric, you always doubt, every cycle. That's why you never finish it. He met her gaze. Then this time I won't. She smiled. A small, tired smile that seemed to carry 17 lifetimes of hope. Then let's rewrite the ending. Together, they walked to the core. Halric raised the key, its edges glowing like molten metal. The surface of the sphere rippled, opening like an iris. Inside was a pulsing vortex of light, the heart of the Chronos engine. He turned to her. If we're erased, what happens after? Someone else will wake up in the new timeline, she said. Without memory, without control, but free. He nodded. Then let's end the clock. The key slid into place. The chamber trembled. Light cascaded outward in waves, blue, gold, then white, so bright it devoured everything. The sirens cut off. The footsteps vanished. Time stopped. In the final instant before dissolution, Halric heard her whisper, "See you at the beginning." And then, silence. When the light consumed everything, it did not feel like death. It felt like becoming unbound. The air dissolved first, then sensation, then the concept of now. Time no longer moved forward or backward. It scattered. Halric drifted through what remained of reality, fragments of existence spinning like glass around him. Every shard showed a different world, all of them broken. London burned in one, that the Bureau's tower floated above another, split open like a wound. In one fragment, he saw himself as a child, staring at stars that no longer existed. The core's detonation had torn through every timeline that fed it. 17 loops unraveled at once, each collapsing into the next. The result was not destruction, but merging, layers of time folding in on themselves, bleeding together, rewriting causality in silence. Halric tried to speak, but found no voice. Sound itself was gone. There was only rhythm, the slow heartbeat of what remained of the universe. Then, from the blinding white, a shape began to form. A city, But not any city he remembered. The streets bent like clock hands frozen mid-tick. Towers rose and fell in impossible geometry, old stone merging with glass, future technology growing from ancient ruins. The sky flickered between dawn and dusk in the same breath. He was standing at its center before he realized he'd moved. Beneath his feet, the ground rippled with reflections, echoes of people walking, moments living, seconds dying. Everything existed at once. The Chronos collapse wasn't just the end of time. It was the creation of a world where all time coexisted. Halric staggered forward. The city whispered with memory, fragments of voices he knew. His own, Alaris, the countless others who had lived and died within the Bureau's cycles. You broke the clock. You freed the hour. Now what will you build from the ruins? The brass key lay in the dust near his boot. Its glow was dim, almost gone. He picked it up. It felt heavier now, like it carried the weight of every moment ever lived. He wandered through the city, through echoes of lives that flickered and vanished as he passed. People walking backward, rain falling upward, laughter caught mid-breath. No one noticed him. They were all trapped fragments, pieces without awareness. Then he saw her, Elara, standing at the base of a shattered clock tower. Her figure was translucent, as though made of light reflected through water. Her gaze lifted to meet his. "You made it," she said softly. The words reached him not through sound, but memory. He stepped closer. "Where are we?" Her form flickered. The crosspoint, the place where all timelines collapsed into one. The Bureau's machine is gone, but its memory still lingers here, waiting for someone to shape what comes next. Halric looked around. The city stretched endlessly, a skeleton of history waiting to be rebuilt. Can it be fixed? Alara's smile was faint. Not fixed, rewritten. The world doesn't need control anymore. It needs choice. She reached out her hand, translucent, trembling, shimmering like a reflection on water. He hesitated, then took it. A surge of warmth flooded through him, the sensation of every lifetime converging into one. 17 versions of Halric Vane, each with their memories, pain, and choices, merging into a single consciousness. That he gasped. The city around him pulsed in response. The clock tower reformed, gears turning, light flowing through cracks like veins awakening. "You see now." Alara's voice echoed. "Time was never a prison. It was a language. We just forgot how to read it." He nodded slowly. "Then we'll learn again." The ground trembled. The sky brightened, dawn and dusk merging into pure radiance. The city began to stabilize, its chaotic pulse softening into rhythm. For the first time since the collapse, there was balance. But Alara's form began to fade. He reached for her, panic flickering through him. "No, stay. Please." She smiled with quiet peace. "My time was to guide you. Yours is to live. The crosspoint needs a mind, one that remembers why it fell. That's you now." Her light began to scatter into the air, becoming threads that wove through the city's core. "Elara, don't mourn me, Halric. I'm not gone. I'm the hours you'll build." And with that, she vanished into the light. Halric stood alone beneath the new clock tower, the brass key now glowing again, bright, steady, eternal. He looked to the horizon, where the fractured city stretched into possibility. He understood then. He was no longer a prisoner of time. He was its architect. The Bureau was gone. The cycles were broken. And for the first time in 17 lifetimes, the clock was silent. But silence, he realized, was not the end. It was the beginning. He raised the key toward the sky. Light spread outward from it, weaving through streets, towers, reflections, knitting the fragments of the world into something whole. A new time began. A free one. And as the first true sunrise crossed the horizon of the rebuilt world, Halric whispered the words Alara once told him, the phrase that started it all. "Let there be an hour without control." The world answered with light. The world reborn under Halric's hands did not resemble the one that had collapsed. It grew in quiet symmetry, free from the suffocating rhythm of the Bureau's control. Time flowed naturally now. Seconds bled into minutes. Days rose and fell with the sun. People lived without loops, unaware they had ever been rewritten. Yet beneath the calm surface, something stirred. Halric could feel it in the hum of the city, the way the light dimmed at certain hours, not by nature, but by interference. He had spent weeks shaping the crosspoint into stability, teaching time to move linearly again. But there were distortions, fractures, small and deliberate. He stood at the edge of the Great Meridian Tower, a new structure built at the heart of the reformed world. Its base contained the remnants of the old Bureau's archives, the fragments of machines and memory crystals that hadn't dissolved during the collapse. He had left them untouched, believing some history should remain buried. Now, they called to him as the wind swept across the horizon. Halric descended into the tower's understructure. The air thickened with static, faint traces of residual chronon energy, the very essence the Bureau had used to bend time. The glow from the crystals pulsed like dying embers that he approached one. It flickered to life. The projection that emerged was faint but unmistakable, the seal of the Bureau of Temporal Integrity. And behind it, a voice, Protocol Theta active. All surviving operatives, initiate Meridian Directive. Halric froze. Operatives? There shouldn't have been any survivors. The Bureau had been erased, its leadership scattered across broken timelines. But the message continued. Contain the architect. His pulse quickened. The architect, that was him. He leaned closer. The holographic static sharpened, forming the image of an old chamber, steel walls, flickering lights, figures in dark uniforms. They were gathering around something, or someone. A reflection, his face. But it wasn't him, not this version. It was one of the other Halrics, from a previous loop, the seventh iteration, if memory served. The one who had chosen to join the Bureau rather than fight it. He stared in disbelief. That version should have been erased when the loops collapsed. Yet here it was, alive. The image shifted. The other Halric, dressed in a Bureau coat, was addressing the group. The architect will attempt reconstruction, he said coldly. If he succeeds, we lose control. The timeline must remain tethered. The Meridian must be activated. The vision ended abruptly, leaving the air trembling with the echo of his own voice from another life. Halric backed away, the weight of realization pressing down like gravity. The collapse hadn't destroyed every version of himself. Some had survived, embedded within the remaining time fragments. And at least one of them had chosen to preserve the Bureaus while he climbed back to the surface, his thoughts spiraling. The city gleamed in the distance, peaceful and unaware. But deep within its new rhythm, something artificial beat in secret. The Meridian Directive, quietly rewriting the balance he had fought to restore. Night fell. Halric walked through the streets, invisible among the people who had never known the Bureau. Yet as he passed mirrored windows, he saw flickers, reflections that did not move as he did. In one, his mirrored self turned its head after he walked by. In another, it smiled when he did not. The Meridian was already working. It had resurrected his echoes, the other versions of himself, and set them loose in the city. Each one carried a fragment of the Bureau's logic. Each one believed it was the real Halric Vane. By dawn, he found himself standing in front of the old clock tower, rebuilt, shining with new metal and memory. The reflection in its glass surface stared back, but not with his eyes. The other Halric stood within the reflection, older, colder, Bureau insignia glinting on his coat. You shouldn't have rebuilt the world, the reflection said silently, though Halric could hear it in his mind. You only gave us form again. The tower bell rang, the ground trembled, and from the city's horizon, dozens of silhouettes began to emerge, all of them him. The Meridian wasn't just a protocol. It was a resurrection, a convergence of every Halric that had ever existed, now living parallel within the same world. Some were broken, some were ruthless, and all of them believed the world belonged to their version of time. Halric understood then. The real war had just begun. The Bureau was gone, but its greatest weapon, the multiplicity of self, had survived. The collapse had freed time. The meridian had divided it again, and at the center of it all, he stood, the last true Halric Vane, staring at his own army across the skyline, each reflection carrying the same question in its eyes. Which of us deserves to exist? The clock tower struck 12 that the War of Selves began. The morning that followed was unlike any before it. London stood still beneath a red-tinged sky, the sun fractured through unseen prisms of time. Every clock across the city ticked at a different rhythm, each tower chiming its own hour. The air shimmered with distortions, echoes of overlapping realities bleeding into one another. Halric Vane stood at the heart of the chaos, beneath the rebuilt Meridian Tower. Around him, the streets twisted in impossible loops, one moment cobblestone, the next polished steel. The world was collapsing inward, folding across its own dimensions as the surviving fragments of time began to compete for dominance. And from every mirror, window, and reflective surface they stepped through, dozens, no, hundreds, of versions of himself. Some older, some younger, some scarred, others cold and calculating. Each iteration carried the weight of choices made differently. One a soldier, one a scientist, one a bureau enforcer, one a rebel. All shared the same face, the same voice, but none shared his conviction. Each one believed they were the original. They moved across the fractured streets, gathering beneath the crimson light. Some wore bureau insignia. Others bore the mark of resistance. All of them had survived through the cracks of time that refused to close. Halric felt their presence pressing on his mind, like mirrors screaming in unison that he knew what this was, the final safeguard of the Bureau. That if the architect, the true Halric, ever threatened the system, the Meridian would awaken his reflections. Every version of him would emerge to fight for their claim of reality. The one who survived would define time itself. He took a slow breath. So this is the Bureau's legacy, he whispered. A war against myself. Lightning forked across the sky, fracturing the clouds into streams of light. The reflections moved. The first to strike was the Halric from Cycle 7, the one who had sided with the Bureau. His face was older, colder. In his hand, a Chronon blade shimmered, slicing the air itself. You ended the control, the Bureau, Halric said, voice hollow. But without control, there is no order. You'll destroy everything we built. Halric stepped aside as the blade tore through the street, splitting it into two timelines for an instant. One frozen, one burning. We built a prison, he replied, and called it protection. The others closed in. One, a version that had lost his family before the first loop, raised his weapon. You can't understand what I've lost, he said. If control means I can rewrite the pain, then I'll rebuild the Bureau myself. Halric looked into his own eyes and saw grief twisted into obsession. That's not peace, he said. That's erasure. The battle erupted, time fractured. The world became a labyrinth of collapsing realities. Each Halric carried mastery over fragments of the temporal field, bending seconds into weapons, freezing minutes, looping attacks infinitely. The air thundered with the sound of time collapsing on itself. Halric fought not just with strength, but with clarity. Every strike of his blade was aimed not at his doubles, but at the bonds tethering them to the Meridian. He understood now, they weren't enemies. They were echoes, corrupted by the directive that refused to die. He severed the first bond, and the Bureau, Halric, dissolved into light, his face softening in relief before fading entirely. Another fell, then another. Each disappearance restored a fragment of the world's balance. But for every reflection erased, the directive adapted, summoning stronger echoes. Ones fused with machinery, wearing armor woven from Chronon metal, eyes glowing gold. They spoke in unison, voices overlapping like a chorus of his own mind. You cannot undo what you are, Halric Vane. You are the Bureau. He fell to one knee, pain rippling through his body as the meridian's pulse synchronized with his heart. His memories spun, every loop, every iteration, every death replayed in rapid succession. He could feel the weight of every life he had lived pressing down like gravity. And then, through the storm of his own mind, he saw her, the woman from the memory engine, the one who had guided him at the beginning. She appeared beside him, her form flickering between light and shadow. "You're losing coherence," she said softly. "They're all parts of you. You can't kill them. Then how do I stop them? By remembering why you were created." Her words pierced the storm to in that instant. Halric saw the truth. The Bureau hadn't built him to preserve control. It had built him to preserve time itself. But when the Bureau fell, its purpose corrupted. His reflections had carried the remnants of that corrupted directive to in them. He didn't need to fight. He needed to forgive. He closed his eyes and reached inward, opening his mind to every version of himself. He saw their pain, the soldier's guilt, the scientist's failure, the enforcer's blind loyalty. He embraced them all. "I release you," he whispered. "All of you." A silence fell. The reflections froze mid-motion. The world trembled, not with violence, but with stillness. One by one, the echoes began to fade, dissolving into streams of light that rose into the crimson sky. Each carried away a fragment of his burden. Each left him lighter. When he opened his eyes, he stood alone. The city was whole again. The red light faded, replaced by the pale glow of dawn. The Meridian Tower, once humming with endless energy, was silent now. Its core dimmed. The Bureau's final echo had ended. Halric stepped into the morning light, the weight of eternity resting quietly behind him. The world around him was alive, imperfect, unpredictable, free that he knew time would still falter. People would still make mistakes. But that was the point of existence, to live without loops, without rewrites. To move forward, even if it hurt that the sun rose above the skyline. He turned one last time toward the reflection in a nearby window. For a moment, his mirrored self smiled, peaceful, real, before disappearing forever. Halric Vane walked into the light, the last echo of the Bureau fading behind him. Time was finally free, and so was he.